Welcome to the broadcast, my fruits. It's divine to see you, and I thank you very much for joining me. I've read the tome. Have you read the tome? Well, I'm here to share my thoughts on that tome. And first of all, pass me the smelling salts. Somebody pass me the smelling salts, because the images that I've got in my mind that have been put there by Harold with regards to his todger, I felt like I was being battered by that ginger todger for the several hours that I spent reading the book. And it wasn't the sort of battering that I enjoy, my dear. Seriously? Why has he supplied us with these awful images that I never wanted to think about in my life? Of his frostbitten pecker. What does he call it? Frost-nipped. This pink itchy thing in his pants. I don't want those images there, and he's placed them right there. Frostbitten pecker. Massaging Elizabeth Arden into it. 8-hour cream, presumably. His mother's lip ointment, rubbing that into his nether regions. I don't want to be supplied with that kind of information. It's absolutely unnecessary. He urinated all over himself while he was on a boat, he tells us as well, peed himself. Takes great joy, doesn't he, in regaling us with all these tales about the princely pecker. I don't want to know, my dear. And he's snipped, we hear. He's snipped. Which also seems to intimate that Big Willie is snipped, which is a great disappointment to me. But, I don't want those images in my mind. Just because your HRH style has been put into abeyance, my dear, it doesn't mean that you need to replace it with TMI, because that's exactly what it is. And I really don't want to think about your thing, which I can only presume looks like a cocktail sausage on a nest of marmalade. Anyway, one thing you've got to understand about the British is that they are self-deprecating, and that is the British sense of humour, and that is a thread that is weaved throughout this tome. And Mooringer has done a splendid job of making Harry palatable to the public and really quite appealing. Yes, he's done a good job of that. He's done a good job of plucking out the good bits of Harry, which are seldom seen these days, but still hide there somewhere in the shadows. He's plucked them out. Very successfully. But also, I commend Harry because he doesn't shy away from his own flaws throughout this tome. No, he doesn't. He may be blind to many of them and not be fessing up or admitting many of them, but he certainly doesn't shy away from some of his more human characteristics, shall we say. So I will commend that. What did make me smile? She had the measure of him, didn't she? Aunt Margot. Yeah, she did. Shady bitch. Shady bitch. That Christmas present she gave him, a biro. Yes, a biro, Harry, a biro. For those who aren't in the kingdom, a biro is a ballpoint pen, a very cheap sort of ballpoint pen affair. And any cheap stationers will sell you a biro. Apparently she gifted him a biro one Christmas, wrapped in a rubber fish, which I couldn't quite understand. And was rather shady, wasn't it? And not terribly generous of spirit. But Harry believes in mystical messages and mystical signs. So I think that Aunt Margot had the measure of him. I think she was predicting what he might do in his capacity as a wayward spare. And the biro represents the cheap and tacky writing that we've been presented with. And it's wrapped up in a rubber fish because that writing is fishy. Something fishy going on, my dear. And I'm not talking about the mysterious Selkies. Anyway, this review of a kind is my thoughts, and it is going ahead assuming that you know most of what I'm talking about already, because I don't want to go over hackneyed ground and just give you a basic review. I want to share my thoughts and insights and just pieces of gossip. The press have picked up on the fact that it seems to be riddled with inaccuracies, misremembrances, such as the death of Gangan. You'd think you would remember such an event, hearing that the Queen Mother died. He says he was at Eton. He describes the weather. He goes into detail about taking that call. And then we find that, in actual fact, he was away skiing in Cloisters with the family. He recalls with fondness playing with an Xbox on his 13th birthday, and then we discover that his 13th birthday was several years before the Xbox was released. He arranged a first-class flight with Air New Zealand between Mexico and the United Kingdom. And then we find this week from Air New Zealand itself that they don't do first-class flights and they don't run between Mexico and the United Kingdom. And Moehringer has already been defending Harry on this subject. He's been tweeting a defence, quoting Mary Carr, who wrote The Art of Memoir. The line between memory and fact is blurry, between interpretation and fact. There are inadvertent mistakes of those kind out of the wazoo. Now, the tome as a whole, if you were asked me to mark it objectively out of 5, I'd give it a 3, a 3.4, 3.5 out of 5. Somewhere like that. You know, it's not especially elegant. It's not a great work of art. But neither is it poorly written. It's not a gripping page-turner, I wouldn't say. But neither is it completely dull and boring. It's fairly interesting, especially for my taste, parts 1 and part 3. Part 2 focused on his war years, and that is just a personal taste of mine. I cannot stand reading about warfare, anything military. It just bores me, my dear. It's just not something that I've got family members who can pore over tomes, great tomes of the war, but it just doesn't interest me, I'm afraid. So that was difficult for me to sift through, but sift through it I did. But part 3 really is where the juice is, because that involves Meghan and William and Catherine and all the drama surrounding that. So that's what I'll be focusing on, actually, with the points that I'll be reading out to you today. But actually, as a propagandist tool, so to speak, as a promotional tool for William and Harry, well, it gets a 4 or 5 out of 5, I'd say. Yes, Moehringer, did very well there. Very well indeed. So, got to give them hearty congratulations. Well done, my dear. Well done. And of course, yes, as I told you months ago, and as I've been saying up until last week, it's sold like hotcakes. It's sold like hotcakes. Say what you will, my dear, and some of you berated me at the time for saying it. No one's interested, no one will buy. Well, it's the fastest selling book, non-fiction book in history, my dears. So no matter how you're going to slice it up and dice it up, my dear, the book is a success. I noticed in the run-up to this quite a lot of sourpusses seeming to miss the point that it was a strategic decision. It was a standard tactic of Random Penguins to price the book at £28 as its recommended price, so that they could immediately slash it to half price, stick a great big blue sticker on the front telling everybody they've got a great deal. This is standard practice in book publishing. It wasn't out of a fear that the book wouldn't sell. Random Penguins never expected Joe Public in Britain to spend £28 on Harry's book. No, they didn't, but they did expect them to run out and buy it for £14 if they thought they were getting a great deal, a half-price deal. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book. It works on a psychological level, the same as pricing something up as 99 cents or 99p instead of $1 or £1. It makes people think that they're getting some kind of bargain. So we're going to kick off with the courtship period between Harry and Meghan. And I think this is one of the great strengths of what Moehringer has done for Harry, because he has spun a wonderful love story, which is very seductive. It's funny in places. I actually did giggle out loud a couple of times. Not great big belly laughs, but it did provoke some laughter from me, which was quite rare. So he's done a good job in the retelling of this. I actually think that it will win over a lot of fans for those who are on the fence with regards to the Harkles, especially those that have enjoy the romance, a romance novel. It's a wonder that Fergie didn't write this confection, this Mills and Boon's confection. It gets very Mills and Boon, my dear. So it's kind of half cringe, but half kind of endearing for those who might fall for the spell that is being cast by J.R. Moehringer, my dear. Yes. God, I love your freckles, says Harry. I just love your freckles. I could just take a pen and join them all up, do a dot to dot. Actually, I rather like her freckles too, so I can't blame him for finding that appealing. But you're pushing it, Harry, when you say how cultured she is. Cultured? Cultured, and she doesn't know that she's supposed to curtsy before a queen, never really heard of anyone in the royal family, I ask you. Oh yes, he says that she's cultured because I can't believe you put this in the same sentence. Because she was going on holiday on an Eat, Pray, Love expedition. Basically because she had read Eat, Pray, Love and Harry hadn't read it. Well, she was obviously very cultured because she had read Eat, Pray, Love. I mean, honestly, my dear, it ain't War and Peace. What is this boy thinking? And, there's so much evocative imagery from their times in Africa. The scenery is set with the sparkling starry night. All the creatures of the world, you'd think that Noah's Ark had capsized. Actually, I think Harry says that himself. We have rhinos, we have crocodiles, we have lions, and Harry's not scared of the lions. He meets a few of them on his travels, but he's undaunted by them. You'd think it was a scene from Lion King, my dear, or Midnight at the Oasis. Because all the creatures of the world, these mysterious magical creatures, they embroider the Harkle tapestry. And, well, you'd think it was Snow White meets Dr. fucking Dolittle. And when they meet up in England, Harry goes to visit Meghan for one of their secret trysts. And the bellhop ushers him inside, knocks on Meghan's door, and she pulls him in quickly because she's missed him so much. She pulls him into the room, and Harry says that I didn't even have time to put the do not disturb sign on the door. And then he tells us the following morning that they needed to eat as soon as they woke up for sustenance, basically implying that, they'd had a rather marathon reunion. And that's all very well and good. It's all natural, my dear, but really need to know about it. Do we really need to know about it? And anyway, they needed sustenance, so they had a hearty breakfast after their night of fervour. And then later on in the morning, they fancied a trip to Waitrose. They wanted to go to a supermarket, but they didn't want anyone to recognise them. But there was a Waitrose on Kensington High Street, so Harry said, well, we'll go together, but we'll go apart. So we'll shop together, but we'll pretend that we don't know each other, semi in disguise. And then he tells us, I was surprised that nobody recognised Meghan as she was walking around. Why were you surprised, my dear? You tell us that Catherine and William are great big fans of Suits, and I know that a few people did watch Suits, but I'd never heard of it. I wouldn't have recognised her in a police lineup, my dear. Not many people would have. It was a niche audience. And especially when she's not got her glam on, do you really think that people are going to say, oh, it's her? No, my dear. Now, I found this part very interesting. By its omission, Harry omits some information about Meghan's relationship with Eugenie. And forgive me, please forgive me, I've only read this through once. If I missed a paragraph or a sentence, I'm sorry. I really don't think I did. But throughout the entire first phase of the courtship where they meet up, there's no reference to the fact that Eugenie already knew Meghan and that they were already acquainted. No. It's only later, when they're at Windsor, that Harry says that he introduces Meghan. The first stop was Royal Lodge, because Meghan already knew Fergie's daughter, Eugenie, and Jack. But this is some while later, after they met, you see. And up until that point, there's been no communication to us that she had already been acquainted. Now, why wouldn't he mention that? Don't you find that very strange? Why wouldn't he have mentioned that through all the information he gives us during the courtship? The fact that they met on Instagram, she popped up out of the blue via his friend Violet, and then they have their first meetings, their first dates. Is it not curious that he doesn't say that she says or would have said, oh yeah, I'd met your cousin Eugenie. Oh wow, Eugenie? Amazing, that's my cousin, I adore her, I'm so close to her. None of that gets an airing. We don't hear about Eugenie until quite a bit later when Meghan is at Windsor and meets Fergie, and that's how that's brought into the mix. So what's going on there? Because Meghan told Oprah Winfrey, Eugenie and I had known each other before I had known Harry, so that was comfortable. Why was that piece of information omitted? And I'm only suspicious of it because are we being told the full truth about how Meghan came to Harry's attention on Instagram? Didn't usually have anything to do with that? Maybe not, perhaps not. But then why wasn't the connection illustrated earlier in the tone? Strange. Meghan visits Nottingham Cottage and she cooks salmon. She's always cooking her roast chicken or a salmon. You know, she's a real Nigella, isn't she? She cooks salmon for Eugenie and Jack and their pal Charlie. And then later in the evening, she's violently sick due to the squid that she'd eaten in Mayfair earlier in the day. How embarrassing, my dear. But she was sick, and maybe that's another sign from Princess Margaret and the rubbery fish and the biro. Too much seafood, my dear. Harry describes the moment that Meghan met the Queen, and during this encounter a few other members of the family were present, including Eugenie and Jack and Fergie, who all taught her how to do a deep curtsy, and she executed it flawlessly and was very polite, and Your Majesty and all this, that and the other, so congratulations and well done. But Prince Andrew was also there. Now, we're told that Meghan rather humorously said, "Who was that holding the purse?" meaning the Queen's handbag, because apparently Prince Andrew was sitting there clutching with the handbag, ready to accompany his mother to church. Well, we're told that Meghan thought it was some courtier or servant and asked Harry who it was. And he said, "That's Prince Andrew, my Uncle Andrew, my dear." And that's when Harry says, "So she definitely hadn't Googled us." Now, I do find that a stretch. She was friends. She was pals with Eugenie before she got to meeting Harry. You're telling me that she hadn't bothered to look at Eugenie's history or Eugenie's father out of interest, as anybody would if they weren't that well acquainted with the royal family. Harry is hell-bent throughout this entire part 3 of convincing us that Meghan just didn't have any interest at all in his royal connections, who he was, or that part of history. Is that more likely, Harry, or is it a little bit more likely that that's just what she wanted you to think? Harry decides that it's time for Meghan to meet his brother, so he takes her to apartment 1A at Kensington Palace, and William opens the door to greet them, and we hear that Meghan pounces. She pounces on Big Willie. Instantly she hugs William, and we're told that William recoiled. Well done, Willie. Sounds like a completely natural reaction to me. Harry says it was a cultural collision. A cultural collision. No, Harry, so I'm not letting you get away with this. I have been to America. Moreover, I've been to LA and I've been to California. And the parts of California I've been to are the shishi parts. And I'm sorry, the people I met there didn't just leap on me via mutual friends and hug me. They might have wanted to, but they managed to restrain themselves. And here in the kingdom, people are no less huggy than across the pond. I really see no difference. But how could it not occur to the gal that she's entering a rarefied world? How could it not occur to her that she is immensely privileged to be privy to take a peek behind the curtain? You know, to see all the good and bad things about that very private, secret world, and not proceed with a little bit more caution and a little bit more grace. And William wasn't the only one that seemed to sense mischief at play, because Lupo, William's spaniel, Lupo, the dog interrupted and began barking as if it were a burglar. Lupo knew what was going on. Well done, my dear. Harry's obsession with the media and disparaging headlines becomes very clear. And actually, I saw an article today illustrating how warped Harry and Moringa's vision of all this press disparagement actually is. For example, on that famous day that Meghan spent with the Queen, and they looked very cosy together and were having a giggle. Well, I remember that day. I remember the reporting because I remember the glowing headlines about it. And this was pointed out in the newspapers today because it was all glowing headlines about how Meghan was making the Queen laugh. But you wouldn't think so to read this tone, because all Harry mentions is some criticism that Meghan unfairly picked up for not wearing a hat at a certain point. And she certainly does face a lot of unfair criticisms. I see it all the time. Ridiculous stuff that she doesn't deserve to be criticised for. And that's one of them. But that was a tiny speck among a proliferation of glowing positive praise, coming from the Daily Mail, coming from a lot of these newspapers that they say only disparaged Meghan. So it isn't put into perspective, it isn't put into context. And all the disparagement she received is magnified so much. And Harry admits throughout this whole thing that he is constantly running through his phone, running through Google, looking at headlines to see what the press are saying. Seems to spend his whole life doing this. And poor Charles, King Charles, darling boy, it's all, they're very much caricatured during this, which I understand is easy to do. But, he keeps telling his son, just don't look at it. Don't look at it. He knows what he's talking about. He's been there. He's been there, the Queen's been there, and they've learned not to take things to heart for a reason. And they speak from a place of knowing and wisdom in that respect, because it's never going to do you any good. And on the one hand, he tells us that the palace never intervened when he asked them to. But then in the next breath, when bad press emerges, he tells us that a Buckingham Palace lawyer did intervene. And I huddled with the lawyer, trying to work out how to protect Meg from this attack and all the others. Well, try closing the newspaper, my dear. Try closing the newspaper, switching off your phone and getting on with your life. Simples. I spent most of every day from the moment I opened my eyes until long past midnight trying to make it stop. You're obsessed, boy, obsessed. For no reason. And Jason Knauf urged him to do nothing. You're just going to feed the beast. Silence is the best option. Well, he had a point, didn't he, Harry? And Harry reveals how one of his strengths can also spill over into one of his weaknesses, which is the need and the want to protect and be a man of action, which can, of course, be a wonderful thing. But he certainly fits the archetype of action man. For those abroad, that's our version of G.I. Joe. We have the Barbies, the Cindy's, and action man. He's very much action man. And, he doesn't like to just sit twiddling his thumbs. He likes to do and be active, which is a wonderful quality to have if it is controlled and contained and doesn't overwhelm one's life and one's character. And that is what it does with Harry, you see. He says, I felt helpless. This was after Meghan got chased by paparazzi in Canada. I felt helpless and realised this was my Achilles heel. I could deal with most things as long as there was some action to be taken. But when I had nothing to do, I wanted to die. And this is a recurring theme, and I think that it gives a lot away that he wasn't planning to give away. When I had nothing to do, I wanted to die. He has to be taking action, do you see? Something has to go, there has to be a spanner in the works, there has to be a fly in the ointment. As much as he objects about them, if it's not there, if he doesn't have that melodrama or psychodrama or just plain old drama going on, then it seems to gnaw away at him, and he wants to be spun into action, called to action, which is why he enjoyed the military so much and why it was a good channel for his emotions and feelings and that restless energy that he has. And I noticed he drew a very unseemly comparison at one point between Doria's plight and his mother's. And this is no shade to Doria, but this was during a time when Doria was working in palliative care, so she's working with old folk that are dying, and the paparazzi, he says, are stalking her out, taking photographs of her, setting up long lenses of Doria, which of course she didn't deserve. But he draws this comparison to Diana's last sounds that she heard, hearing the click of a photographer, of a camera. And he draws a comparison between that and the sounds that Doria's patients, her palliative care patients, heard in their dying moments. He says, Paps scaled the walls and fences of the many patients that Doria visited. In other words, every day there was another person, like Mummy, whose last sound on earth would be a click. I'm sorry, I think that is really pushing the artistic and the poetic license a bit too far, my dear. I have every sympathy for those old folk that were under Doria's care, but as much as I'm sure Doria was very much aware of the paparazzi around her, I really don't think that these patients or clients of hers would have had much idea of what was going on or hearing these clicks. And I think it best, my dears, if I draw this discussion to a close for now and continue it in the next broadcast, my dears. Yes, that's what I'm going to do. So thank you very much for joining me. Do leave me a nice juicy comment, especially if you read the tome. Let me know what you thought, good and bad. Tried to be fair, and I'll catch up with you next time. Thank you most sincerely, especially to those of you who have left me a tip jar treat. You are very kind, and I will see you very soon. Toodles.